Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session of Semantic Partners, and I give you one of the founders, Lance. Lance, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope you've been having a great conference. I'm Lance Payne. This is me talking at a last talk some time back before we had a pandemic. I'm a founder of Semantic Partners, SP, software engineering background. I've got a massive data orientation, quite an opinionated doer. This is where I grew up. Tiny little town in the middle of the North Island of New Zealand, population 700, and this is what it's most famous for. I'm hoping one day it'll be me. That it is. And if we wind right back to the start, this was my first computer, age 5. I got this machine, and more importantly, that manual that taught me to code, gave me a great love of being able to make pixels change colors and do all sorts of things with it. And so I've been doing that for a very long while now. Fast forward, I graduate from university, move to the UK, work in a number of different industries, predominantly finance, high frequency trading, doing stuff that would now be called big data well before big data had a name, and also things with like event sourcing well before it was called that. I got frustrated having started out my career a lot with SQL databases, and in fact, even writing a database engine in one of my first jobs. Got quite frustrated with that, the lack of testability of the things, and for a long time was an engineer who avoided databases at all costs and just model stuff. But I had quite a fortunate journey through those institutions where a lot of the data we modeled was really just tripleized stuff, but without the benefits of Sparkle. We didn't necessarily know about that at the time, or it wasn't there. Now, fast forward to having started with Semantic Partners, we've got clients everywhere from tier 1 global banks to manufacturing biochemical processes. So what am I going to talk to you about today? As a saying in the UK, I don't know if it'll translate across to other countries, but it's about your coat, and it's take it off inside, or when you go outside, you won't feel the benefit. That's kind of the thrust of the talk. What are the things that you need to have in place in order to feel the benefit of all the great things that semantic tech is going to bring? I'm going to start with why, which is what this slide is about. Start with why. We're far from the first people to say that. There was Simon Sinek most recently. You might have heard of his books. Give them a read. They're quite great. If your organization and the people within it know why you're doing the thing, then they'll be in a much better position to be able to deliver what it is you're asking them to do. When they reach inevitable stumbling blocks, they're going to be able to make the decision. And in the immediate term, is this thing taking me closer or further from my goal? And this is pretty much what all these points are going to come back to. So bear that in mind. Now, in a recent engagement, which is for a manufacturing client, we were tasked with building a genealogy. Now that's like a record of all the batches of materials that are used in what other batches and so on. So you can imagine like a family tree of things that get used in manufacturing. Now that becomes crucial if, say, something goes wrong in the manufacturing process. They want to know, what other things had this in common, or what other things could be affected, trying to find commonalities and differences and track down track those down. Now, the problem is, in their existing systems, which like all large orgs are siloed data sets spread across the enterprise, pulling together some of that data can often take them weeks, if not months. So you can see some quite obvious value if we can shrink that time. So we were brought in, build this genealogy, bring the data together. They've made various attempts at automating parts of this in the past, and they've done it across different product lines, usually getting to 1 or 2 before heterogeneous data, broken my brain, broken my SQL schemas. How do we do the next ones? Don't know. So we come in, I work with an SME who's keen to become a dev and happy to start learning SQL. And within a couple of weeks, we've built a schema We've built an ontology, we've brought in data, we're mapping it against test results. We're doing that not just for 1 or 2 product lines, but for all of the products across 10 of their major sites within a single triple store graph instance, and we're building a UI to help them start to explore that. And it can bring those answers back within a second. How great is that? So end of talk, right? There's nothing else to say. We can all go to the pub, home, whatever. What do you do in a remote conference? We're celebrating. No, not yet. And this is what I'm going to talk about now. So one of the things is, if your organization's idea of data integration is printing out multiple reports and manually cross-referencing them, you might not be ready. This is something we actually have struck, right? That there are records of materials coming in, and they are still paper records. As great as Graph is, we can't magically get that in there for them. It's not suddenly scanned and OCR'd and recognized. There's a bunch of work there that needs to be done, regardless of the solution. Thankfully, there's a bunch of tools that can help and get us straight into triple space. So there's hope. Does this sound familiar? Now, as I've alluded to, I've been in this game across industries for a couple of decades. And I admit there's a time when I was quite proud of my Excel wizardry and VBA expertise. I think I used to have it on my CV. Don't tell anyone. And I feel like I've been trying to make up for that for the last several engagements with just actively trying to kill Excel wherever I go. Now, what happens then? Whenever I present some new UI and we've brought together data that was siloed and we're either showing something in a novel way or we're just recreating a thing that already existed but now in Graph, one of the first questions is always, can I export that to Excel? What I've come to learn is, rather than, of course, practice the 5 whys on that. Over the years, by doing that, saying, well, why do you need this and where does it go? I follow to the next team, ask them, what's this report that you're being sent on a weekly basis? Actually had people go, we don't know, we've just been getting this for 5 years. That's it. There's one whole team producing a report for another team. That team doesn't even know what they're getting anymore. Kill it. The other thing is, maybe they want to export it to Excel to do some minor transformation, like put another column on that's going to be pulled in from something else. No. Keep that stuff in the graph. Get that knowledge out of their heads. Super, super valuable. Get that repeatable. Get that in. Another interesting thing I've met through going through orgs is you meet people who have been sort of internally evangelized, and they're putting their hopes on inferencing and ontology, thinking it's essentially magic. And while there is a degree of that, it's not the be-all and end-all. And I think as cool as inferencing can be, really the superpowers of Graph start down in that 80% of RDF and Sparkle, maybe a bit of Shackle if you want some shapes. So we meet people who think that it's going to be magic. I try and dissuade them a little bit without trying to put them off Graph entirely. Now, this kind of leads to the next point, which is we've seen too many models developed in ivory towers that don't survive the first battle with the data. And that comes from isolated ontologists modeling in an ivory tower. We've actually even had a client who's still got the client. Their ontologists have been modeling solely in PowerPoint. If they're modeling and their model never meets reality, I don't know if this is going to transmit well. One's Lego, one's real-ish. How do you know whether your model is useful? There's a famous saying by statistician George Box, all models are wrong, but some are useful. How do you value your model? How do you measure the utility of your model? And also, if you're waiting for it to be perfect before it's unleashed, how will you ever know? This brings me to another point. So I've said, no, it's not magic. I've also come across a class of users who or potential users, sponsors, who are kind of afraid of that new graph stuff. In this case, I'm kind of arguing it's actually not new at all. Propositional logic has its foundations in 350 BC with Aristotle. And he outlined the first three. Sorry, I just saw Mary's joke. With Aristotle, he outlined the first three laws: the law of identity, that A is A; law of contradiction, that A is not B; and the law of the excluded middle, there are no exceptions. Now, that's a 2,500-year-old technology, right? This is at the core of triple stores and reasoners. And yeah, there are many laws on top of those, but anyway, it's been around for longer than other things. I shall not name sequel. Oops. I want to touch on this briefly while I'm talking about philosophers. Because although I do meet plenty of ontologists who have a philosophical background, I seldom hear this point made, which is the ontology is the study of the being, or what is. And axiology is about ranking of values, what things are valuable. And epistemology is how do you know what you know. Now, I feel like in the semantic text space, a lot of people just focus on that first one. Ontology. But with my very first slide, for the start of the talk proper, start with why. Now, epistemology, we've got a solution for that with the deliciousness of things like Provo, right? So, hurrah. What, why, and how. There's another one. So, ideally, all organizations are exactly like this. We know where we're going. Everyone's aligned. We're all going in the same direction. Does that sound like yours? Everyone's nodding. I can't see any of you, but I assume. Unfortunately, most of the organizations I've worked in are a bit more like this. And it's recursively muddled all the way down, right? So this goes back to the know the why, help ensure that everyone is aligned and pulling in the same direction. And it leads us to our next point. Just to prepare for an organizational civil war. Now, there's an old story from the UK government, which is a newly elected young Tory MP comes into the Houses of Parliament and he takes up his space on the bench. He points to the benches opposite and he says to Churchill, "So that's the enemy." And Churchill supposedly replies, "No, son, that's the opposition." And then he points to the benches behind and says, "That is the enemy." Now, as a knowledge graph, initiative, program, project, or whatever you're going to be called, honestly, your competition's not coming from other vendors in this space. Right? We all know what we're shooting for, which is transformation and change. What we're fighting is the well-meaning but misguided entrenched attempts within the organization. As we demonstrate use case after use case with a fraction of the resources of existing approaches, the old guard gets nervous. In one client, we're going and doing things with a very small team that is far outshining a team of 500 who have been doing stuff for years. They'll probably eventually eat us. But we'll see. We'll draw this bigger circle and bring them into the fold and try and teach them to the better ways. So expect attacks. Expect to be held to higher standards than that of the existing projects. I've had challenges. Why? How do you do this? And how do you do that? How have they been doing it? They don't. This kind of brings us on to the point of what's their provenance and slide out of order. We'll come to testing in a moment. Now, another piece of confusion that we've seen, in fact, we had one exec at a client who was probably a few weeks into the engagement when we realized that they thought that when we said graph, they thought we meant graphs, charts. They thought that what we were offering was some sort of Power BI alternative. So we've learned, make this explicit very early on. In fact, the tool I'm building for one client, we've got it baked into the training inside the tool itself, just to make that clear. Now, speaking of misunderstandings, that's right. Another jokes. I like it. Speaking of misunderstandings, it seems like hardly a month went by in 2023 when someone was not asking our opinions on ChatGPT. And I see there's been a few talks. I'm going to skirt this topic. But we'd have project sponsors suddenly saying, why can't we just do it in AI? And so here's a couple of anecdotes. So recently, when we were preparing a report for a client, we asked ChatGPT, can you list the license arrangements for 17 data standards? It only got one right. Luckily, we checked it before sending it. On another occasion, we had Microsoft, in case you're unaware, owns a good chunk of OpenAI, and came in to meet us with a client, and the sales engineers have a strict and severe rate limit. So they've only got enough tokens to demonstrate a simple use case, and it's something like once every 10 minutes. So between, oh, here's a little demo, and now we wait, they'd talk to us and explain that this was outright because it's so expensive. They're rate limiting themselves because of the cost of the demonstration. The second strong message, that while they're delighted, suddenly everyone's going, oh, give me ChatGPT. They've already got an enormous suite of things in Azure, and other clouds are the same, that do a lot of AI-related stuff for you and much cheaper. These are the salespeople for ChatGPT, pressing you to look at simpler, cheaper, already existing solutions. Not my words. Now, then we dug into some hands-on examples. And I think this is where semantic graph is going to shine, which is enabling you to query with natural language your data, so driving the ontology to generate the sparkle, but also the reverse, that if you ask it to generate a response and maybe it hallucinates, you can then constrain the response it gives you from your well-curated data in your graph. And I think both of those are natural synergies. Okay, another thing. So data quality. I'm sure everyone here knows it's the foundation of a successful data project and data initiative, but if your quality is so poor it looks like a piece of abstract art, you might not be ready for the precision of graphs. You'll have some cleaning up to do. They thrive on clean, well-structured data, and they rely on accurate relationships and meaningful connections. It's the meaning, Jerry. So take a step back and focus on data cleansing and quality assurance. And ensure that your data is accurate, consistent, and up to date. Because if it looks like a Jackson Pollock, you've got something to do. Now, regardless, I'm not saying don't get it in a graph. I think graphs and RDF and Sparkle are superb tools for helping you clean the data. And with things like named graphs, layering the data, testing those what-if scenarios and checking the state is fantastic. Let's talk about delivery methods. I wish I'd put Larry the cat in there. So do you ever feel like your organization is stuck in a battle between traditional waterfall and modern agile methods? Yeah. Well, a brief history lesson. So I was very fortunate, I guess, in my second year or so of university, did a course on, or a module on development methods and approaches. And this was a few years before the Agile Manifesto, and it was well before Scrum hit the scene. So we were shown this 1970s paper by Dr. William Royce. He had been developing software for decades for NASA. On the second page of that paper, there is this diagram, which shows a flavor of the classic upfront waterfall development system. It wasn't called waterfall then, but a lot of people attribute this paper to the origin of that term. And I think whether it's software or data, we often see the same model. Now on the second page, on the third page, flipped under that one, you have this. Notice the arrows, iterative interaction. In fact, that's in the figure title, about feedback between each of the stages. So already in the paper that supposedly is the origin of the supposed waterfall, he's actually saying it never is. Don't try and do that, you need feedback. And in fact, immediately below that, It's more complicated even than that, because your refinements are never confined to successive steps. You need all these mini iteration cycles, expect more between all the stages. Now, this kind of brings me on to one of my favorite topics, kind of a hero, W. Edwards Deming. In case you've not heard of him, potted history. So he was a statistician who was called in by General MacArthur to help in the post-World War II efforts in Japan to improve quality. It's a tale about MacArthur being frustrated that he couldn't even make the phone call to Deming because the infrastructure was so bad. He brought him in. Now, Deming is regarded as the non-Japanese person most responsible for the Japanese miracle of the 50s and 60s. It's what led to the Toyota production system, which became the basis of Lean and ultimately became the inspiration for all the agile methodologies. At its core, it's this: plan, do, check, act. It's the Deming circle, the Deming cycle. Okay, so we're spinning in a circle. Not really, because it builds then upon this. Consolidation through standardization, right? And this is, I think, where graph with ontologies really has a chance to help your organization grow, but only if you let it in the org. We've got our client now who's still living in a very waterfall-y world, who wants to know everything they need to do up front in order to do what? Curiously, we had out of the Toyota production system, there's a phrase Gemba, which means go to where the work is done. I'm a big proponent of that. In fact, we've just been doing that with one of the manufacturing clients. We finally got into the room with the people using the tool who are absolutely ecstatic with what we're doing, and now we're getting the feedback of, it'd be great if, which is super. That's going to let us try the next experiments. On Deming's 14 points, right up there at the top, constancy of purpose. I think that's essentially another way of saying why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Build quality into the product. That touches into what we're going to talk about with testing. Breaking down barriers and working as a team. Draw those bigger circles. Bring everyone in. You're trying to get it better. And the transformation's everyone's job. Now, on that topic, have you got architectural review boards, ontology panels, things doing sign-off? What we learn from those Deming cycles is faster feedback essentially wins every time. And if you are waiting 3 to 6 months before you can have a review of whether or not this thing's allowed to go through, you're not ready for this. What we're finding successful is having to educate the people we meet along the way, not view their challenges necessarily as an impediment, but just another opportunity to grow. Which brings me to this one, architecture. Now, I've been doing this thing for a while. The origins of architecture are chief builder. In the Renaissance, the architect was the better builder. They often were the most skilled. 3 times in my career, I've had architects, software architects, say to me, oh, well, I wasn't very good as a developer, so I became an architect instead. I view it all as just abstraction. I'm going to leave you to ruminate on that. I'm not sure I'll ever hear anyone tell me that again. If your CDO or CEO thinks that Sparkle's some sort of exotic bird, you might not be ready. Again, it's educate, get them to learn the benefits. How are you going to do that? The small, demonstrable feedback repeatedly. Another one we strike. If your organization thinks they're moving to the cloud, but they're just doing everything in the same way they did, if there are 6-month lead times to get a machine in the cloud, you're doing it wrong. You've missed the point. Fix some of this stuff, and we can probably help you do that. We have a few projects which are about mapping infrastructure for more efficient moving to the cloud. Now, in terms of Deming's baking and quality, how do you ensure that you've got quality in your RDF pipeline? Well, we find that as great as Shackle is at ensuring the data quality, testing the pipelines is another matter, and we're growing out that in a tool called Mustard. It's open source, but not yet public. We're using it in a few clients. It's an RDF ontology with a Python execution engine that can run transformation and Sparkle, loading data sets and ensuring that Sparkle that is at query time or transformation time does what you say it does. If you're familiar with software development, Cucumber, it's that for RDF and Sparkle. Another one, do you have access? I've had clients where it can take 3 months to get a login to the systems. 3 months. And once you're inside, do you get access to the siloed data sources? How much of a battle is that? Wait is waste. What are you modeling? As is versus to be. Sometimes we'll have a conversation and we'll find that the thing we're talking about, trying to model, there's some as is state versus the to be state. Which one are you actually talking about? Try and make that clear. I believe there's a natural proclivity based on personality types. What are you doing and what are you doing it for? It's kind of the why, but in the small. Are you building the thing to prove a point, to perform an experiment to see whether or not you should go left or right at the next move, whether this was a good thing or a bad thing? Doesn't matter. Or are you stamping widgets with refined machinery? Now, it doesn't matter. Be honest up front about how much effort should be expended in doing that. You don't need a fully fledged thing if you're just doing an experiment. Now, the key takeaways, start with why. Yes, knowledge graphs can transform your business, but you might require, in fact, expect institutional changes. With too many places have the documentation and approval processes are set up as silos, and they almost insist upon it. Experimentation is important, but be explicit. Don't fear growth. Your progress is good, but so don't miss out. Try and get your C-level buy-in. Prove it down at the ground, though. And don't drown in paper stacks. Let your knowledge graphs work. That's me. That's my talk. So we're London, UK based. We've got about 10 languages spoken. We've got something like 7 countries, people across Europe and in the US. We do knowledge graph ontologies, consulting, vendor product implementations using RDF. We're stack agnostic, essentially. We're opinionated if you ask us, but there are some we like more than others. But we'll work with any of them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lance. Are there any questions you're burning to ask Lance? You can post them in the chat. Otherwise, we can give you a minute back of your lives.
I love that there's been chat.
So John O'Gorman is asking, given a motivated client with an integration use case, where would you start and what will be the most immediate deliverable?
I think that's almost too generic to even answer. Integrating what, who's going to use it, what's the impact, how will you measure success?
I think you just answered it. Ask the obvious questions, right?
Well, I think they're obvious. You think they're obvious. I don't know if everyone agrees.
But John is asking in terms of immediate deliverable.
Yeah. So it's going to depend. That's hence my questions. What is the thing that will demonstrate the value to the people who make the decisions? And I can't answer that for you. It's organizationally dependent. I always try and get in a team someone who has that organizational know-how. They understand the hierarchies. They know who I need to talk to. That stuff is invaluable. It's not going to be in a database. You just need to know. And sadly, it's often not who you're initially assigned.
Thanks a lot, Lance, for being with us. We'd love having you. And
thank you.
Let's move to the next session. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone, for listening.